World War I, really turned fire into a constant battlefield threat. Flamethrowers, incendiary shells, aircraft engines, and fuel-soaked trenches made ordinary cloth deadly. Wool burned slowly, cotton burned fast, and leather, well, it failed under sustained heat. Behind the front lines, military laboratories began quietly testing a radical idea: fabric that would not ignite at all. These experiments were rarely publicized, partly because they touched on emerging chemical science, and honestly, partly because the results were intended for pilots, artillery crews, and specialized units where survival depended on seconds. What they developed was not magic, but, well, it was revolutionary for its time. So, what the so-called fireproof cloth actually was. The most effective World War I fire-resistant fabric was asbestos cloth, woven from mineral fibres rather than plant or animal sources. Asbestos does not burn, melt or easily degrade under extreme heat. It could actually be woven into blankets, curtains, gloves and protective covers. Alongside asbestos, chemists also experimented with chemically treated cotton and linen, soaking them in salts such as ammonium phosphate, borax and alum. These treatments did not make cloth fireproof in the modern sense, but they made it self-extinguishing, meaning it would char instead of bursting into flame. Why these tests were kept quiet during the war? Fireproof cloth had strategic value. Aircraft cockpits lined with asbestos fabric reduced pilot injuries during engine fires. Artillery crews used fire-resistant covers to shield ammunition from sparks. Engineers lined observation balloons and fuel storage areas with treated cloth to slow ignition. Public knowledge of these materials could have encouraged enemy countermeasures or, revealed vulnerabilities. As a result, much of this work remained buried in technical reports and post-war industrial patents. How asbestos cloth performed where other materials failed. Asbestos fibres are crystalline minerals that withstand temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius. When exposed to flame, asbestos cloth neither ignites nor produces toxic smoke from combustion. During the First World War, this made it invaluable for fire curtains in ships, insulation around engines, and protective gloves for handling hot metal. Soldiers reported that asbestos blankets could be thrown over small fires to smother them instantly. No organic fabric could match this performance. The dark side of what they did not yet understand. World War I engineers understood heat, but not long-term health. The microscopic fibres released by asbestos were invisible and, deadly when inhaled. Back then, asbestos was considered a miracle material, It would take decades before its dangers became undeniable. Still, this does not diminish the historical importance of the cloth, but it does help explain why the knowledge vanished from mainstream use and, honestly, why secrecy surrounded it even after the war. So, here's how chemically treated cloth worked when minerals were unavailable. Not all fire-resistant fabric relied on asbestos after all. Treated cotton was, in fact, easier to produce at scale. The cloth was soaked in a solution of fire-retardant salts, then dried. When exposed to flame, these salts released non-flammable gases and formed a protective char layer. This slowed burning long enough to prevent flash ignition. These fabrics were used in uniforms, tent liners and equipment covers where asbestos was impractical. Where this cloth was tested under real combat conditions. Aircraft mechanics use fireproof cloth aprons while working on hot engines. Naval forces installed fire curtains below decks to isolate burning compartments. Trench engineers tested treated fabrics as blast and spark barriers near fuel dumps. Some experimental gas mask components even used asbestos fabric because it resisted heat and chemical degradation. These were not laboratory curiosities. They were field-tested solutions under extreme conditions. So, what can, modern survivalists actually take away from all this history? Well, the real lesson here isn't about trying to recreate World War I materials, but rather it's about understanding the underlying principles that made those materials effective in the first place. Fire resistance at its core comes from either using non-flammable fibers or interrupting combustion through chemical means. It's really about stopping fire before it can take hold. These days, fiberglass cloth silica fabric and modern fire-retardant treated cotton, they offer the same benefits as those older materials, but crucially without the deadly risks that came with asbestos. Welding blankets, fire-resistant tarps and heat shields all descend directly from World War I experimentation. How these principles apply in practical modern ways. A modern fire-resistant cloth can be used as a stove heat shield in an off-grid shelter. Fire blankets can smother cooking fires instantly. Treated canvas liners reduce fire risk in tents and cabins. The World War I insight was simple. Separating people and fuel from flame, even briefly, saves lives. That principle remains unchanged. Why this forgotten chapter matters today. World War I forced rapid innovation under pressure, and fireproof cloth was one of its quiet successes. So, it bridged the gap between natural materials and, modern fire science. While the original materials are, no longer safe, the thinking behind them really shaped everything from firefighter gear to industrial insulation. What this secret testing reveals about wartime ingenuity is quite remarkable. Engineers worked with what they had, tested relentlessly, and accepted imperfect solutions because, imperfect protection was better than none. They understood that survival often depends on materials no one notices until, honestly, they fail. If you value deep historical knowledge that still informs real-world survival and design, subscribe to In the Beginning. Share this episode with fellow history buffs and preparedness-minded viewers, and help keep these overlooked lessons alive where they belong.